the 20th century created a hyperspecialization, but also a huge confusion. Things are changing and we need to be able to respond to these many moving targets with a holistic approach. Majority of societal challenges are located in urban and suburban areas. It's almost too arrogant to think through design you can change it. Transformation is an interesting term because it implies that something is transforming. It's way more complicated. It has to be a solution, not just a reflection or an idea. Forget about all these cliches and stereotypes. We can learn so much from each other.
That is Piplas, Director of Integrated Urban Solutions at Drees Sommer and lecturer at ETH Zurich, Switzerland. As an urban system strategist, Harris works at the intersection of climate adaptation, infrastructure, integration, and large-scale city transformation processes, navigating complex governance environments in global projects. He is a trained architect and urban designer, but actively adopts a holistic approach and leads highly interdisciplinary teams in building cities that withstand and adapt to the test of time. My name is Peter Marcus Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges Podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. We reflect on the many out-of-the-box ways our guests have navigated the complexity and intricacies of our environment at the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. On today's show, Harris and I go deep on the complexities of urban transformation in an age of hyper-specialization, discuss what regenerative urbanism should and should not encompass, and how we can make the many moving parts around city building better talk to each other. We also trace how Harris's own personal experiences growing up in Sarajevo and Berlin and his global engagement have shaped his view on urban revitalization. Visit tgcpodcast.show for detailed information and show notes on this episode. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the show. Harris, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
You know, fresh off the plane from Baku, you were at the World Urban Forum, and straight into a podcast.
It was a fantastic experience. It's a very dynamic place. I've been there already several times, visiting the events related to UN Habitat, the activities of UN Habitat in this part of the world. I also worked as expert for UN Habitat in the past and was also curious to see this economic transition and the result, the 30 years, what type of society and city you can build. And also the post-conflict dimension is something that I really wanted to examine, and also visiting some areas of Azerbaijan that have been obviously contested for many decades and centuries. So good to be back and to have this conversation with you.
No, likewise. And yeah, definitely a very quick reflection on an event that, I'm thinking at some point in the future, I should go and attend these events because they look quite intriguing to me. And I feel like I can learn a lot from there, just from the practical side as well.
Yeah, I would say that the World Urban Forum attracts usually 25-ish thousand visitors.
Wow.
Is a proof that we as built environment professions, we cannot complain that we do not attract interest from UN agencies, from international city networks, from neighborhood disciplines, if you talk about engineering or policy and governance consultancy, or as well as the financial side. So there is a plethora of World Bank and European Bank of Reconstruction and Development personnel attending these events, private developers as well. So it's a gigantic platform where we can discuss how to design, plan, manage building cities, landscapes, neighborhoods. And in this sense, it's a proof that if 30,000 people, almost 30,000 people attend such an event, that what we do as planners, as architects, is of high relevance.
No, indeed. And 30,000 potential change makers. I mean, sometimes they say it just takes one person to make a change. So huge momentum there. But no, thank you for coming on after the big plane journey and also arranging this beautiful room here at Drees Sommer. I love the style. I really should get myself a podcast studio like this. I can get used to this, definitely.
Glad to have you here. And also, I remember great collaborations in the past, also with other friends and partners such as 10 Architects and others. So good to have you here and good to have you in the premises of Drees Sommer here in Zurich, Switzerland. Also happy to explain more in detail what do we do in our office. And we are very glad to be sitting here in the west part of Zurich. Wiedikon, this is the name of the neighborhood, it's the periphery of the former working class district. And then obviously there is industrial production. There still is, or there was industrial production. Most of it left the city not that long ago. So even in the 1990s and even in the 2000s, you had partly industrial production, but now still some urban manufacturing stayed. But this particular building here is a former viewer, so the listeners can look it up. It's a beautiful brick building that has been refurbished with in-house expertise. So we have our own interior architects, workplace change makers, urban psychologists, and engineers and technicians working on the refurbishment. So it's I hope that we still kept some of the charm of its early 20th century design and aesthetics.
Oh, wow, the whole interdisciplinary team. I did notice the green wall when I walked in with the slightly confusing message because it had the word blue on it. So
that's a good point. The company philosophy of Drees Sommer is called the Blue Way. And before I joined, I was researching it, and I was quite positively surprised that the Blue Way stands behind the idea that one needs to use both sides of the brain in a project and both let's say the creative part. Now I'm simplifying it, the creative, intuitive, emotional part of the brain. So the design, aesthetics, and the social sustainability plays a role. And very often, and this is being played against each other in a project, is then the rational, technical, mathematical part. They have to be in a certain symbiosis, in a certain synergy. And that's something that I really appreciate with our office, that it is about the physical, but also it's about the social and the human elements in a project, in a place.
Really that holistic picture. Yeah. And, bringing in all the expertise. And I guess, it goes without saying, if you don't use both sides of the brain, then you risk having very sterile, outcomes or highly creative but unmanageable, undoable projects as a result of that.
That's true. And you see more or less in many countries or in many cities, so-called stranded assets, a building that is somehow not manageable or not financially viable. There's no, maybe even aesthetically, the building is of worth, but its business model, its functioning model, its management model, what functions, what programs do we want to have in the building? They're not being thought of sufficiently. So you have this beautiful envelope, but from inside there is a museum that is impossible to be self-managed and self-financed, or there is a urban manufacturing entity that is just doesn't have enough space and doesn't have the facility, do not fit to its growing reality of a growing organization, a growing company.
Yeah.
So they move out. So what we have as a professional and professionals have to do better is to think of the design, of the process of designing, building and planning, but then very important, the maintenance and management and functioning of a building, because we cannot just focus only on the process of how to get something built, but what happens after. Can this be reused, reassembled, etc. So that's those considerations that we also have in many projects. And so of course it's difficult because it's almost a foresight task, because we don't know what's going to be in 30, 40 years, but we know that a building or a neighborhood or a landscape needs to be flexible enough to be reused and refurbished.
Gone were the days of the set it and forget it. I think we have to use that foresight strategically, especially with our cities now facing a lot of uncertainties. So, as you said it yourself, and I think that's going to really shape the theme of what we're going to get into today, which I think is going to be quite diverse, but definitely centered around building cities that work going into the future.
Yes, it's a great point, and I'm looking forward to looking at it with you in detail. It's about the transdisciplinary, holistic partnership approach that we need in our cities and our projects. So yeah, very happy to explore that together.
Oh, awesome. But I guess we'll start with your story first, because I think that in itself is very fascinating. So, you've studied landscape architecture, you also studied urban design, you work in urban transformation. I guess from your side, how would you describe yourself? Are you merely an architect? Because I don't think that's really the case.
I'm thinking that the 20th century brought a unnecessary disciplinary boundaries and limits that created a hyperspecialization, but also a huge confusion. What type of work is being done by a architect or landscape architect, an urban designer, urban planner, environmental designer. And if you look into the titles, the names of master programs nowadays, they have even more diverse names. For example, there's a master of human settlements, etc., etc. There's a master in, as you say, urban transformation. There's study programs that carry even more different names. And in this sense, I believe that the way how we structured the built environment, that's why I call them built environment professions, is completely outdated. And this is why I, not just as talking from a strategic or big picture point of view, but also talking about what you mentioned, the urban transformation. And to transform an urban or suburban space, you need to understand politics. You need to understand the legal regulatory aspects. You need to understand media. You need to understand the stakeholder interests, and including the citizens, but many other stakeholders. You have to understand how it is about designing and planning, and one comes in it's different in different places. It's different in Rotterdam and in Kuala Lumpur, and it's also different in Fortaleza and in Busan. So practicing in this, what we summarize as urban transformation, you realize you need a very diverse skill set for that. And you need also, and obviously, it's not a one-man show. You need big teams. And for that, I feel that the 20th or even late 19th century descriptions are fully outdated, and they create a certain conflict. So there is this, conflict between engineers and architects about landscape planners and landscape designers. And I say conflict. Yeah. There's a certain... There's certain maybe overlaps and tensions that are fully unnecessary. So there is, how much time is being spent to argue what task is being covered by urban planner, which one by the urban designer. And we get, more and more siloed, and the whole built environment profession get even more fragmented or being cut in even smaller and smaller pieces. And to transform a place, you need a diverse skill set and you need a diverse team. And this is what I, realizing as being a student of urban design in Berlin, which was a master's program that combined 4 institutes together: architecture, urban and spatial planning, urban sociology, and landscape architecture. I felt this was the minimum that we need to be practicing in transforming a place from something into something else. But still, the way of how to interact with media, how to calculate the budgets, how to understand the stakeholder needs, etc. We are usually, as built environment professionals, not being taught. That's something that despite studying all these, having now the doctorate officially in architecture and urban design from the ETH Zurich, and having such a diverse master's program behind me, and also having a diverse diploma study in Sarajevo in landscape, but also with strong environmental and biotechnical aspects, and then a diploma back then with a urbanism specialization, I realized these differences between how we divide each other are not necessary, but also we need even more skills to be operating, let's say, in a successful way.
No, indeed. And as you've already summarized, you've been to many places. You started in Sarajevo, where you studied landscape architecture, then urban design in Berlin. You did some research work in Politecnico di Milano, and you mentioned ETH Zurich as well. And collecting the skills over time to create that diverse mindset and to address a pressing problem in a world where I feel, it's the bickering, as you mentioned, the conflict or the tension points, and I feel like from other episodes, we need people that are able to connect the dots. And in a way, you've seen yourself in that lens, in that role.
Yes.
One aspect or one real driver, I believe, also came from growing up in Sarajevo under pretty challenging situations. Could you tell me a bit about your time there and how that evolved your mindset for thinking about cities and I guess shaping cities of the future as well?
That's a very good question, and I probably inevitably cross-connected to what I was talking before. So being born in a family that we're part of it has been active in railway infrastructure, planning and management and operations throughout the Balkans and beyond. This was having its origins in the Austro-Hungarian, royal network of railways and a empire that stretched from northern Italy and the Adriatic coast to western Ukraine and nowadays, and going south to Bosnia and in the north to parts of Poland and Czech Republic. That's a family history continued, now having family members who live in Austria and in Germany and in Sweden and throughout the Balkans and beyond. I realize how important that is to obviously understand different cultures, different viewpoints, different, if you want, identities or different, feelings. I mean, identities change, right? And there's people who, cheer for one football team or soccer team, and then after 10 years you meet them, they prefer, maybe they were a Real Madrid fan, and then you meet them 10 years later, they're suddenly Barcelona fans, and etc. So things change. Those are fluid. Identities are fluid. And in this sense, a city of Sarajevo itself, a melting pot, and there are many nicknames, some of them a bit more almost pathetic than others, but Jerusalem of Europe. But it's a city where the big Abrahamian religions have been overlapping and cross-pollinating for centuries. So the Catholic and Orthodox Christianity, including evangelic elements and others, Islam, that was obviously brought through the influence of the Ottoman Empire, to different groups of our Jewish neighbors, the Sephardic Jews that fled the Reconquista of Andalusia in the late 15th century, then fled to Sarajevo. You still have these people who have to carry nowadays Spanish-sounding names, and also the Ashkenazi Jewish neighbors who came then mainly from Eastern and Central Europe. So you have a city that has different scripts, letters, different alphabets, different religions, different music styles, and being born in so-called non-aligned Yugoslavia in the 80s, which was a co-founder of a third bloc in the bipolar Cold War era, right? We have the East and the West, and they have this strange multi-religious, multi-ethnic Yugoslavia founding this third bloc. The listeners can look it up. And then these companies and institutes from Sarajevo being exporting their knowledge and products and infrastructure innovation to Africa, to Asia, to India, and obviously to the West. My grandfather worked in Angola and Iraq in the 60s, 70s, and 80s as a Yugoslav expert. So in this sense, this family history that is kind of pan-European, moving around Europe, and then this kind of Yugoslav cosmopolitan dimension through the non-aligned movement, plus this religious diversity of Sarajevo. I mean, this has to, if it doesn't open your mind to different opinions, then I don't know what it is. and this is something I try to bring into my everyday life. Or it is an inherently part of my everyday life, but also bring it back into project work. There, I'm happy to explain throughout the conversation how the construction, now I spoke about the positive aspects, and obviously the destruction inspired me to do what I do today.
That was a really diverse response. No, but a real rich illustration of, I guess, growing up in an environment with so many different diversities, or I guess identities, as you say, that come together, and then also going through conflict as well and experiencing that firsthand. You mentioned the word destruction and reconstruction, and this doesn't necessarily have to always be in the context of conflict, but also in the context of urban renewal, when buildings eventually need to be replaced or protected. And I suppose that topic followed you all the way through to your PhD, in which you really focused on understanding how do we rebuild a city, whether it's post-conflict or whether it's when renewal is demanded. And the one term that comes to mind here is urban regeneration, or regenerative urbanism, how people call it. I guess it's kind of been defined. I was looking up the history of that, and it's kind of changed its definition over the, let's call it, centuries. 19th century, I looked it up. It was more around, in the UK, where they needed to do something about the urban quality of life, given that industrialization was in full swing and you were getting declining living conditions. I mean, as a water engineer, I know this. They say the greatest medical advancements of the 20th century was the sewage system. So really infrastructure changes. And that's now kind of evolved. And nowadays we talk about more bringing nature in the sustainability debate. I guess from your perspective, regenerating urban areas, I guess what should it be and what should it not be?
That's an interesting point, and you're right. I mean, without wanting to enter too deeply into etymology of where does urban regeneration start and urban revitalization end at what is urban renewal and etc. Transformation is a interesting word, is an interesting term, because it implies that something is transforming, right? And it's not always in a there's always losers and winners in transformation. Always. That's something that we have to be very pragmatic and realistic about. But looking into literature, you can find the urban transformation of Detroit in the late 80s, 90s, and 2000s. This deindustrialization of Detroit and its shrinking and its deurbanization, basically, has been compared with the destruction, with the war, man-made disaster, with the war destruction of Sarajevo. So you have these, if you want, obviously, the transformation or destruction happens for different reasons. Maybe, General Motors moves to Mexico or to China. And here there is a full-fledged armed conflict in Sarajevo. But there is a change of places, and the change happens in places. And in this sense, growing up in this idyllic, cosmopolitan, non-aligned Sarajevo and be embedded in this quite an interesting social and societal experiment called Yugoslavia. And then, having family members who already lived all over Europe and spending time as a kid and being surrounded with different languages and with different influences, moving to Berlin, which I consider, as my second hometown, spending some important formative years, but arriving to Berlin, which Sarajevo, let's say, did not benefit from the end of the Cold War. Sarajevo was the Olympic, flourishing city in the 80s and early 90s, a rich city. And then there were changes that caused its destruction, its physical destruction and herbicide, annihilation of the city. And then moving to Berlin, that profited from the change, from the end of the Cold War, right? The end of the wall fell, evaporated. And then you have suddenly this kind of renewal and reconnection and right, elements. So spending your childhood in these two cities that both had, let's say, the East and the West element in a different dimension, having both a socialist history, at least the eastern part of Berlin, there where I lived, and have this kind of war, and not comparing different wars, not at all, but the war, is a term. It's meant something different in Berlin than compared to Sarajevo. But there are, let's say, quite some parallels. And this influenced my looking at destruction and reconstruction, my childhood and my teenage years. I realized I want to do something where I can maybe support in this kind of physical reshaping. Maybe it's another term. And that's why I realized I want to be an urban professional. But and maybe this is why, realizing that just design, it's almost too arrogant to think through design you can change on. And, I mean, come on, you look at loss of human life and destruction, and in both Sarajevo and Berlin have been such geopolitical hotspots. I mean, the Cuban crisis played out in Berlin, right? These two tanks, the Soviet and the American tanks that are pointing each other, Checkpoint Charlie, and Sarajevo, that has been this kind of geopolitical neuralgic point. You see how geopolitics, macroeconomics play together, how conflict and destruction, what investments come. So you see, obviously, investments and money from all over the world coming to post for Sarajevo, and not resulting in the most beautiful and most functional projects. So you realize you're just drawing an image, and it's way more complicated than just being creative and being good in creating, colorful drawings. it is about geopolitics. It is about finances. It is about stakeholder interest. And this is why I think I did this full circle throughout my studies, half intentionally, just to be able to understand at least the design elements, the planning elements, the financial. I needed to obviously learn also outside of school, but to have the big picture, I needed to do around from landscape to urban to architecture and beyond.
It's almost like that journey of self-discovery as well, where you just have to go through the motions because you just don't know enough at the start. I think they often commonly say, when you go through university, you finish knowing even less than what you knew before. Or, famous frameworks like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, the less you know, the more confident you feel. And then that curve kind of just drops, in confidence. Yeah. But I've been to Berlin many years ago, actually, after I studied the Cold War. And it was fascinating to see the city itself and also still that dichotomy at Checkpoint Charlie, where you sort of see the piece of history. But you're right to say, it feels like the center point of the attention, and I guess in a way that shapes the city. It makes the city functional, whereas then there are also examples where real destruction has happened and the progress is slower. I think the point you make about design and arrogance and often the geopolitics is something we see at many scales. I mean, we also see this in everyday life. We're trying to put in sustainable ideas and they get pushed back upon. And it's often not the technical aspect. And so, at a much larger scale, regenerating a city, I mean, how is the best way to go forward? How will we move forward in the first place to get these ideas to come in? With investment clearly doesn't seem to be an issue.
Yeah. I mean, at least in Europe, it's not a lack of architects or economists or talented architects and economists or educated architects, economists, engineers, and then sociologists, etc., etc., etc. It is about the bits and pieces have not been playing together. And this is partly because Europe, and now quite a Eurocentric perspective intentionally, you had the pleasure this luxury to specialize, right? There is, as an architect, you can just draw a picture, by hand or by AutoCAD, and then the system is so stable, there is money that's, it's going to be implemented. But that's not how it works in many countries and cities around the world. You have to take care of, drawing the picture of this whatever, but make sure that this picture of the future neighborhood or city or architecture or landscape needs to be accepted. I mean, there are fantastic projects here in Switzerland that is just being rejected at referenda. So it's not about drawing and being arrogant to say there's somebody else who should implement that. It's about feasibility. It's about the feasibility of a project, and it's a financial feasibility of who is paying for the construction and who is, the capex and opex, and who is financing. How is this project going to be viable? Who maintains it and how? So you need to understand law. You need to understand media. You need to understand human psychology, and that's something that we're not being taught. Nobody teaches you, or very rarely in architecture, landscape, and urban schools, how to talk to a mayor, or how to talk to a community leader, or how to talk to the media representative, or how do you bring them to support your project. We think that just log into AutoCAD and ArcGIS and that's, suddenly, or just like sit down in your atelier and draw something by hand, having this sort of misunderstood artist image, and then, somebody will implement that. And that's not the case. And maybe growing up in this sort of, growing up in Sarajevo and Berlin, and also spent a lot of time as a kid and as a teenager in Vienna, where I also later worked as a guest lecturer. So Vienna is almost also like a hometown, spent a lot of time there, and did an internship in Denmark. But coming back to the places where I really spent a significant time, is you did not have the luxury you needed to understand politics, money, interest. And that's something that I'd say brought it into my work, into, again, probably a mix of practice and planning and design and applied research and activism. Many of my projects started as a voluntary activist, and not in the intention to have a project, but that somehow you position yourself in unintentionally, then people come up to you and say, hey, can you help us with a master plan or with a design? And that's something that we have so many of these different hats on, culturally, linguistically, professionally, that again, coming back to defining yourself through this like one word that was, made up in the 20th century, it's way too limiting.
Yeah. But the way I see it, there's really almost 4 different angles at play here. You mentioned the law. So it's really the government making sure they're on board, that it ticks all the boxes, because of course they would be worried if, you're going against it or any legislation in place. There's the media. So I'm thinking the cultural aspect, which speaks to the public, the design itself. So, the expert in itself of how to build the urban environment. And I suppose, as you said, cities are dynamic. They keep changing. Identity, which is also a key word, is fluid. So bringing in the knowledge, which would be anyone who's working in that knowledge space. Am I sort of capturing those elements? Did I forget any?
No, but that's it. And obviously it depends on the project. There's even more of the technical aspects, like as you said, the water and the green blue infrastructure. What type of vegetation is necessary in places where we have climate change, where we have research that shows that as Zurich or Basel are going to have the climate of Milan or Thessaloniki, etc. So it's in a couple of decades, the climate that these cities have today. And obviously a political and other change in Europe. So in this sense, there's quite a political shift in the last 10 and 15 years since I practiced. So in this sense, things are changing, and we need to be able to respond to these changes, to these many moving targets with a holistic approach. And that's something that brought me to Drees Sommer, where we have a core team that is quite skilled in synthesizing, curating with a strong urban focus, but then the engineering, the economic viability, this urban psychology and sociology is something that we can cover through our internal colleagues, through our extended teams, but also through many strategic and colleagues and partners. So this is how we also collaborated in projects. We don't want and need to cover everything in-house, but we have partners. And in this sense, I really believe that it makes it complicated, but you have, 5 or 6 internal experts on board plus 5, 6 external experts. But, to coordinate, curate, manage, and also still keep, not just coordinate administratively, but also to make sure that the big picture, the Gesamtkunstwerk, as we say in German, the final output results is good. That's something where I see, and this is why I'm probably, be careful what you wish for. So today I figure as director of Integrated Urban Solutions International. So it's about international, it's about integration, and it's about solutions, right? It has to be a solution, not just a reflection or an idea. It has to be solution and urban, because majority of societal challenges are located in urban and suburban areas. Cities are the biggest solution, but also one of the biggest challenges, as we know that the majority of CO2 is being produced in cities. The majority of electricity is consumed by cities. So the cities are part of the problem as well.
Yeah. And it's just going to be even more important in the future with massive urbanization, expansion. But you mentioned it, just looking through the evolution of urban regeneration, if you looked it up as well and read a bit of the literature, now it's about the economic revitalization, the social and cultural regeneration, and the environmental sustainability, essentially the 3 lenses. Yeah. But I guess also often, just simply pursuing this can lead to unintended consequences, which would be the flip side of the whole issue, and that is gentrification. We have all these solutions or potential ways to create an integrated solution, but then you often have to face or deal with unintended consequences. Is this integrated approach, call it a fail-safe against these kinds of unintended consequences?
I don't think it's fail-safe, but it's something that is at least an attempt to engage with urban or societal or climatic reality through different lenses, so that to address the concerns of a neighbor who is concerned that there is a transformation of its neighborhood, right? There is and all these concerns are legitimate. We can say, hey, this gentleman over there, he's concerned that his parking space is going to disappear. And then the other neighbor is happy that the parking space is going to disappear. It's going to be unsealed and being turned into a parklet, a green parklet. But both concerns are legitimate. And us as urban transformation agents, curators, we have to make sure also to be free of any ideology in sense of political or whatever other streams. We have to make sure that no one is left behind and everybody's concerns are legitimate. And that's, you can only do that if you have I would say, diverse mindset and if you have a diverse experts on board. And that's something we try to prevent projects being delayed, projects being too expensive, projects being rejected at referenda by considering climatic and social and economic aspects beforehand through having a feasibility and bringing these insights and analysis into propositions.
Yeah. Early enough, open knowledge, and I guess admitting to potential conflict points or tension points. And, that will allow you to create a discourse. And, what's emerging here is really the word participation, involvement, or inclusion as well. And I mean, going a bit deeper into, regenerative urbanism or anything related to that is this idea of the green infrastructure or bringing in, call it inclusivity, or I guess the German word is also Baukultur.
Yeah.
So quality of the built environment seem to have been anchored now in architecture as a term itself. You've dealt with quite a few different projects in that, both on the research side, but I guess also on the practical side. Could you share a bit about, what are some highlights there from projects?
Yeah, that's then you have to do proof of the pudding, right? And proof of the concept. And the project that I currently work on is a project that deals with urban regeneration or renaturalization, to be more precise, with 8 European cities. Project called Commit to Green, partly funded by the European Climate Infrastructure and Innovation platforms, and where we work with these cities that include Barcelona and Milan and Sarajevo and Warsaw on bringing back the green blue infrastructure into a very concretely a polluted, contaminated site in Milan that has been partly landfill. And in this sense, to regenerate such a place is incredibly complicated in a highly urbanized and dense in terms of population environment, such as, let's say, northwest central Milan, or the site that we work on in Barcelona that is on the outskirts and has landslide and also semi-legal or illegal landfill parts in it. It has partly also informal or semi-formal housing. So we work in quite challenging locations. Wow. Or working on the comprehensive recovery of Ukrainian cities now, because we have to deal with the situation, not wait for the perfect moment that might never come, but also during the conflict to engage and also make sure that the lessons from Sarajevo, where an incredible amount of money, global money, is it private investors from the US or from the MENA region or from Central Europe or from international agencies like the German, Swedish, Swiss and other development cooperation programs. Many of these projects have not sufficiently considered that there needs to be a change in Sarajevo of the planning system. There is one planning framework for the socialist era, but in a new, let's say, parliamentary democracy, you need a different planning system. And you need to coordinate these global, it was almost too much attention and too much money coming in. And that's not being coordinated, curated well. And that's something I don't want to see happen in post-war Ukraine. I really want to see that human recovery is important, that it's important to create sustainable projects, to have projects being not just renovated, repainted, but have been made capable or functional for the decades to come. And that's something we're working on with the National Union of Architects of Ukraine and other partners to make this comprehensive recovery happen. Is it in the Bucha region where we work with different communities? Or, again, coming back to Sarajevo, initiating large reactivation and urban transformation project also with the Swiss government and ETH, where, 20 years after the conflict, you realize, hey, a lot of these investments and approaches have not been successful. What can we do now? And then working on a revitalization of the university campus. It needs to become, it's a former military barracks, like the Kasernenareal, and then, creating a nucleus of scientific, professional, and technological knowledge for the city. So in a post-war city, taking a military barracks and put it into a technology and innovation and scientific campus is it's a statement, right? Yeah. So there is projects that I would say that are highly challenging, but it's exactly these projects that I really want to work on, and that they're maybe time and energy consuming, but they're right projects to do. And that's something where I have to really be clear and vocal about that we, these different cities and environments, if you forget about all these cliches and stereotypes. We can learn so much from each other, right? From our best or worst or bad practices and good practices. And I work a lot, obviously, in Switzerland, and we work together on a revitalization of a former or still a site that has a partly military function, and how to turn that into a flourishing neighborhood, right? That where it still keeps urban manufacturing, the industrial production jobs, but also brings in R&D and research and innovation, or working with these suburban derelict former industrial areas that now have to be transformed into something else, rebranded. So that's, again, what you do in Barcelona or Milano is relevant for Berlin or Zurich or Basel or Sarajevo, and other way around. If you really extract the knowledge without cliches and stereotypes, extract the experiences and operationalize it and bring it into context and adapt it.
And really that embracing that identity shift. From my side, just thinking in terms of nature, because I always like to relate things back to nature. It's the same as ecosystems. Often when ecosystems flourish, at some point, there's a moment where the ecosystem gets destroyed. If you reframe this idea of forest fires or bushfires, it is part at times of the natural cycle, and it gives the system a chance for renewal. And likewise, we should be embracing these opportunities. Just looking at nature-based solutions practice in Australia, even here in Switzerland, the only time where it's really time to act is when a road is being ripped out and replaced. And that's where you can come in and put new systems in. And so really the thinking here is also, well, we can do the same at the city scale, but we have to come in early. We have to come in with that holistic picture if we want to actually, as you said, proof in the pudding, put our new ideas for what is a sustainable city, what is a flourishing city to the test.
Exactly. And what it is also fluid, it's changing, and it means different things in different locations. And we work on a strategic advisory for sustainable urban development in 6 Indian cities. So it's a different set of parameters or needs and necessities in Guwahati, in the eastern part of India, than in the northern part of Zurich. So it is, obviously, but that's something that we can only clarify with a strong sensibility and sensitivity to a context. And in this sense, and only then to choose what a solution should be. And this is why I have to be very transparent, strongly oppose this idea of a kind of predefined prototype of a building or doing research already knowing what you want to find out. We have to really go with an open heart and mind and make sure that our analysis is connected to a proposition. And this is why I would say was in a way forced in a positive to do my doctorate, because I realized in the traditional urban practice in the 15 years or 20 years ago, there was not enough time. There maybe still is not enough time to do this analysis and research of a place. And in this sense, through my doctorate and producing real world projects, it was also quite an experiment. I remember the different committees that told me your doctoral dissertation is too practical.
No.
So this is a postdoc project or this is something else. And then obviously working in practice and doing too much research is not good, and then have to claim that, we are not a research institution. We are professional planning and design office. So
the labeling again.
Yeah, the labeling. And this labeling is nowadays, look at the complexities we have to deal with: climate, gentrification, budget cuts, etc. I would say a thorough contextualization is even more necessary.
It is very true. And not only that, the involvement of the community that you're building the city for. You advocate a lot for participatory approaches. You even ventured into gamification as well. Where does that sit, and how do you realize that in a context where you have all these uncertainties, you have all these different decision makers, and you have even though it seems like you have unlimited budget, but you seem to have this big ship to steer.
The budgets are always limited, and that's how it is. And that's also my critique to existing planning frameworks and systems in many countries, where all these, we call them phase 0, right? This is the early phases that are not, it's not about formalization or non-formalization, but they're not formal very often and not being paid for. Yeah. So in this sense, all of these aspects and elements have to be clarified early before even sitting and start to turn on AutoCAD or ArchiCAD or any AI tool that exists in meanwhile, is all of these elements, design principles and stuff, they have to be clarified before. And that's why we are putting a lot of effort in these early phases, and also here with my team at Drees Sommer, and also through and with our partners, is to clarify these to-dos. And this is why I'm also I was even a student critical to architectural competitions, because they come with this predefined brief that you kind of risk of losing the competition if you know, the couple of competitions that you can win if you criticize the competition program and propose something else. But it's usually you lose because you do something different than it has been explained or asked for or being put into the competition program. So you have to stick to the competition program. So it's a little corset even. And in this sense, also competitions are such a tragic losses of knowledge. You have so many teams competing, and there is competitions that open competition, you have like dozens, even hundreds of entries, and maybe 3 win a prize, and there are a couple of special mentions. Yeah. But that's about it. And then the other few dozens and hundreds being put in trash, and this knowledge has been very often not paid for. Yeah. I think that as professionals, we should be paid for our services like all the other professions. And second one, how much more knowledge if we maybe would prefer something called cooperative. It's almost like Cimarron, cooperative competitions, right? Yeah. Cooperative processes. And that's something I enjoy doing those, looking into rather cooperation or co-opetition rather than competition.
Co-opetition, what a word. Now, that kind of works. But you're definitely right about that. And, hearing that story from the architectural side, I had to reflect on the researcher side as well, from back in my research career days. The amount of time and therefore the money value of it, of researchers writing grants, the time spent, and it's usually the professors, and then only a certain proportion of that getting funded, and the rest, well, a part of it will be resubmitted and a part of it gets lost. It's a sad loss of innovation potential and knowledge potential. And I guess that maybe it needs a solution that's completely radical and different, so that we can ensure we capture this, this beauty or this diversity of approaches.
But that's, I have to come back what you just mentioned. I mean, exactly, it's a diversity of approaches. But you mentioned the professors or their pendants, the office owners, right? So there was if you look around research, there's quite a hierarchical reality of professorships and offices, and there's a culture that is actually quite limiting in terms of authorship and in terms of collective. Actually, it's a collective authorship. So very often it's not the professor who writes the proposal or who looks, and corrects the typos and gives 2 or 3 inputs and then claims later the authorship largely. And the same goes with architecture offices. So you have like a building of intentionally now inventing a name. Oh, look at this beautiful stadium project by Müller. Or look at this tower over there designed by Wagner.
Of all the names you could choose.
So I use more, I would say, more generic names.
Generic German common names.
Or Smith. Oh, look at this beautiful school, a kindergarten project by Smith. Or look over there, that's the amazing urban landscape by Johnson. And then you start Googling it and you realize it's a design office with 800 employees. And how possible it can be that is being designed, conceptualized, planned, drawn by this one person. It's not the case. So we do have already collective authorship in our professorships, in our research institutes, in our planning office, in our design offices. They're not just being labeled like those. So in this sense, we have to really be very aware and be able to acknowledge even the interns who are sitting until 3 a.m. while the project won't be, if it's coming back to generic names, and I hope all the Müllers and Wagners who are listening, I do not get it wrongly, but it's poor intern who's sitting in the 3 a.m. and drawing it together, and he's called Müller, is not going to be, his name written there. So we have to really work, and it's the office owner who founded the office 50 years ago and who is now maybe has a very strategic or no function at all. So we have to really distribute authorship and distribute now even with AI and other tools in production that makes us more productive, to use this as a chance to horizontalize demonize the authorship and really have this collective or swarm intelligence that is the reality in most of our projects. I remember the project we did together, there was with 5 or 6 other offices, and each office had 2 or 3 people involved. So it's at least then 15, 20 people that carry if you want, but it's not about authorship, but they do carry the contribution to the project. And that's something we have to, I'd say, be way more inclusive about it.
I think ultimately, yes, the swarm intelligence, having that specialization, having a semi-label is in a way an advantage because you have that deeper knowledge. But being able to work across and to embrace that swarm competence as a swarm intelligence, I think makes a huge difference. Also in, I guess, our morals, and to show this is a collective effort. This is not just, a single person. But you mentioned one of the, the elephants in the room, the AI, but it also, in a way, comes back to one of the things you stressed at the beginning, which is really cities are not just simply built, set and forget. It's really about the long-term maintenance. And one particular topic is the smart cities movement. And Drees Sommer itself is also quite involved in this whole digital twins movement, AI, sensor infrastructures. And you've got a few projects there. On the one hand, I guess you're a bit critical of this idea of smart cities, but at the same time also supportive. I guess maybe unpack that for me, because that makes me curious.
Yeah, just like the other words, landscape, urban, architecture, etc. I believe smart city is just it's or inclusive or 15-minute city or sustainable city, etc., etc.
Marketing buzzwords.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm in general, if they can help to create change, I'm super supportive. So I remember the smart city as a term has been celebrated for years. Then it got this sort of negative connotation now, and then it was suddenly back to being popular again. So it went through just like mustaches with men, right? I remember the 80s and 90s. If you look in the Panini stickers of football players, you will see all the mullets and the mustaches, and we thought it will never ever come back. It will never ever come back into fashion. But now I was in Paris the other day in the neighborhood, but it's not in Paris. I saw like probably men or young kids and boys and girls who were like 20 something, and the men were walking around with these mustaches and the mullets. And I remember, oh my God, it looks like this Italy 1990 Panini album I was collecting as a kid. So it's fashion, right? It's fashion. It comes back. And in this sense, the smart city is a term, and it means to 23,000 visitors of a smart city expo Barcelona means 23,000 different things. And that's actually its biggest power, that people come and gather around this word, around this term, and brings them together. The technology companies, the designers, the planners, the city networks, the large technology companies, super hyperscalers, they all come to these different gatherings, to whatever a smart city expo. And this is exactly the effect that we want to have, not to argue, what is smart, what criteria, or a 15-minute city. Oh, why is it not 17 or 13 minutes? It doesn't matter. It's about that it catalyzes, accelerates collaboration and communication. And that's why I'm supportive of anything that improves collaboration and communication. And as much as I'm aware that there is certain, obviously, if you look into too much distraction by multiple apps and phones, etc., that we all, including myself, are exposed to, but then still the technology I remember when I was a student, we needed to spend the majority of our time clicking ourselves through these. Even back then, I found them fully outdated, the CAD softwares and nothing against any former brands, all the kind of Photoshops, etc. You needed to click yourself, to make your fingers almost like bleeding with a lasso tool, etc. And I thought, this cannot be it. We are change makers. We are sitting and spending the majority of the time with a software doing incredibly repetitive and boring things. And then, you go around and, 5 or 10, 15 years later, you meet people, and many people you meet who you knew as a student say, how's your work? And I was like, it's so boring. Yeah. I'm going to leave architecture and planning. And I'm just, I'm sitting and I'm being this, the different derogatory terms like AutoCAD monkey, etc. So finally, now we don't have anymore the need to do this repetitive, boring. The human Homo sapiens not made of, stamping letters, we can be so much more. And if these digital tools and AI can help us to focus more on the content and focus more on the communication with clients, with stakeholders, citizens, then I'm the biggest fan.
Yeah.
Because this is where the majority of our time should go, not just clicking ourselves with a lasso tool through 3 a.m. No, we should really be able to spend more time for the creative tasks, for the communication, for the outreach. And I see the great chance in this new generation of digital tools to help us to relieve and release us from these repetitive, boring tasks and give us more time and space for productive and more human-centric tasks.
It's certainly something I can jump onto because I myself, I build my models because I want to free up that assessment so that people can actually discuss the key topics.
Yeah.
So umbrella terms are quite useful because they allow us to rally people around a common cause. I mean, I see this in nature-based solutions as well, even though it stems from the conservation side as their proposal for green infrastructure. Water engineers have a different term. At least people get behind it. So there is a certain power in the buzzword in terms of rallying. But because it means so many things, can you tell me a bit about the kinds of projects in the smart city space that you've engaged in and some of the lessons there?
There is, again, many different views and perspectives of what a smart city project is. Right? Is it a inclusively participated and ink project of a green space in Copenhagen or in Thessaloniki? Is it a smart city project? For many people, it is. It doesn't have anything to do with using hardware or software innovations. It's a smart city project is a city where green and inclusive, where there's a new park bench and people can do jogging and walk around and play with their kids, etc. So many people, this is a smart city. But in this sense, yes, indeed, these umbrella terms are incredibly useful. And we have to just make sure that the words are just to gather us and make us work and not waste our time in, I've seen so many conferences where people argued whether what umbrella term is more important than the other, is sustainable or smart city. And that doesn't matter. It's just a way to bring us together and to accelerate our work. And in this sense, the platforms such as the Smart City Expo Barcelona or the new European Bauhaus European Commission or the Baukultur Alliance from the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum has an urban transformation team in meanwhile. Shows that what we do is highly relevant and we must engage in these conversations. So if there is a discussion on something urban or Baukultur, us as experts have to be grateful that these large-scale organizations, either private with interests or public, whatever, is it the UN that has, for example, also a urban development, land management, housing department. There's a UN, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or UN Habitat, an agency that for decades worked on human settlements and housing.
Yeah.
Or is it the European Commission? Or is it a private organization like the World Economic Forum or others? They pick up on our topic. So finally, what I was hoping as a student more than 20 years ago, that what we do is highly, and it should be recognized and relevant, and that we are able to positively influence these organizations. It is happening as we speak. And this is why I'm devoting important chunks of my time for this voluntarily strategic engagement in these platforms in order to explain or give my feeling a certain responsibility to give my feedback and a reflection of what a UN Smart Sustainable Charter should include, or what cities should be part of the Pioneering Cities program of the World Economic Forum, or a platform called Inclusive Sustainable Neighborhoods as part of the new European Bauhaus initiative proclaimed by Ms. von der Leyen. So the highest political instances, without qualifying them, are telling us that what we do is important and that our topics find space in very important parts of their dossiers, of their political or whatever organizational programs. So in this sense, I am quite active in these organizations. And of course, we have to exchange our experiences as colleagues, as experts. So I'm also quite active in these international federations of architects and urbanists and planners and landscape architects. So in this sense, it is important to exchange experience, to learn from each other. And that's why, but not stay in our built environment professionals, designers, planners bubble, but again, get more engaged in these political and economic platforms that find us relevant. And I think that's a great chance. And if we ignore that and say, I don't have the time, or why should I, go to Brussels to the New European Bauhaus Festival or to Geneva to meet the Baukultur Alliance annual meeting, then I find it a pity. So we are responsible for the state of our planet, and those are the organizations that can help us to make it relevant. And as well as I realize I didn't put enough spotlight on it before. It goes hand in hand with what I was speaking before, these international collaborations. For example, there is a partnership between Berlin and Jakarta in smart city and urban innovation. And we had the pleasure to be selected experts or mandated by Berlin and Jakarta to help demystify and further develop this partnership. And we worked on a project that was a strategic smart city and urban innovations document or guidelines, a strategy for Jakarta, but also realizing that in this bridge between Europe and Southeast Asia, there's so much that we can learn in Europe from Southeast Asia and from other continents. So we're realizing what type of vivid startup ecosystem exists in Jakarta and what can Berlin learn from it, or the Berlin innovation ecosystem or microcosm. It was quite fascinating. So these kind of strategic projects that are maybe less about designing and drawing master plans, but they are more about helping to clarify and demystify and concretize what these different challenge owners or like city governments or real estate developers can do. And this again was a pleasure to be this bridge between German cities, the city of bridge or initiate collaboration between Mannheim and the city of Chernivtsi in Ukraine on the topics of mobility and public space design and industrial facility transformation, to initiate a partnership between Zurich and Sarajevo on urban and neighborhood planning and development, initiate or be part of this Berlin, Jakarta, and later Berlin, Bangkok initiative. And so working on these bridges is incredibly, that's a challenge, but inspiring. And I hope it's clear also for the viewers, for the listeners, that we have to engage strategically as volunteers, as activists, but we have also to help projects being formulated. So maybe these two cities do not know what they want to do together. There's a sister city partnership, and now it has to be filled with life. And this is what we work on. And maybe it's not designing a building or a master plan, in the next phase. It's maybe helping cities to define this partnership. And then at some later project phases, we can look into design and planning. But working on these different levels of strategic engagement, then very concrete project design tasks, and then jump back to the strategic. I think we should, as professionals, work on both scales.
I mean, it's incredible to hear just the amount of global engagement that you are involved in, and something I strive to do out of my own voluntariness. Went to a development congress in December in Bangkok, and already amazing to see what you can learn from Asia. And for example, what the Asian Development Bank is also doing around the topic of water, and also taking that holistic perspective. And I guess you're someone who loves to embrace complexity. And just from this discussion already, you can see all the interconnections, and that is actively in your mind. But also, I think the most important thing, and I guess almost coming full circle here, it makes me think of what you published as part of your dissertation, the title of it, which is Reactivating the Non-Aligned City. It's really about alignment and trying to, I guess, line up the ducks in a good way so that everyone is on the same page, which basically comes back to often 80% of the solution is defining the problem in the first place. What are your thoughts there?
Beautifully said. Probably quote you for a few times in the future. But exactly, so this sort of almost a metaphor of this geopolitical non-alignment that Sarajevo was part of, and somehow profiting from both sides of this geopolitical tectonic plates, right? The East and the West, and being a fluid agent between them is something I goes hand in hand with some of my personal understandings of probably globalization that is opens so many doors for exchange and collaboration, and not without a neo-colonial or without a disadvantaged approach to the one side. It's about sort of Berlin and Jakarta. Berlin can learn so much from Jakarta, but also Jakarta can learn a lot from Berlin, and also Zurich can learn from Sarajevo, and Sarajevo can learn from Zurich. So that's this. It's bidirectional. It's bilateral.
It goes both ways,
and that's how it is. And my thesis was going this direction. So yes, Sarajevo profited from this. It was the Olympic city. But then after the Cold War ended, for many reasons, it became the symbol of a destroyed city with 11,000 victims, murdered people, and a completely annihilated urban fabric. So in this sense, in a world where you need to align geopolitically, you have to choose sides, etc. And I'd say Sarajevo, and this is also the case for Berlin as well, that it attracts investment and attention from all over the world. And I hope that this investments and attention, the people want to invest not just money, but also time and effort and knowledge. And I see that now working in Ukraine actively. There's a lot of opportunism, obviously, but there is a reality where people from all over the world want to invest time, money, effort, knowledge.
Yeah.
And this is great, but this has to be used for the reactivation of this particular city, of its particular human capital and spaces and buildings and landscapes, and not the other way around, so that these places get extracted or utilized, or the people there are being used as cheap labor, and the projects that happen there, because of obviously after each conflict, there's a loose institutional frameworks that to attract shady investors from all over the world. And then they implement projects that buildings that are, for example, eating up the public green spaces, and you have the 7th shopping mall in the neighborhood. We need shopping malls. We need places to buy things. That's for sure. But maybe not at the expense of public green spaces where children and elderly and others can spend their time. So in this sense, this interest that these cities radiate, it needs to be curated. So this is what I meant with, and this is my thesis was about. I was looking into different cities in the first hand, but then zoomed into Sarajevo and saying we need to curate this reactivation through this investment from all over the world, but in a more sensible way.
Yeah. Are you optimistic that we're heading in the right direction?
And we have to be optimistic as we must be optimistic. Of course, looking into facts and figures, there is a certain change in our society. There is geopolitical shifts. There is macroeconomic shifts. There is change of paradigms. That's it. Due to my childhoods in these quite dynamic places like Berlin or Sarajevo, I think I went through certain, I'm kind of used to political, economic and social changes. So maybe I'm a bit more resilient or robust in this sense. But I see obviously our societies that, at least in Europe, have been quite on the relaxed side. And then this changes is hitting hard, and we're not, as Europe now, as Europeans, I mean, I'm a European, are not ready for this change. And then suddenly there is opportunism and a lot of money that is being, shifted from climate neutral urban landscape projects to production of military drones, right? So there's a shift, but I'm optimistic that we still have to, as I mentioned before, be active in the project scale, but still be active on the strategic scale, like be active in these chambers of commerce, right? Because they define economic policies. Don't sit and wait for this competition, program that somebody writes and then you have to respond to that. Just, I would say we need a bit more of an entrepreneurial approach to even the built environment, to the design professions. Invent your own projects rather than wait that somebody formulates this. And then you say, there are not enough competitions. Maybe that's good. Maybe we need more co-opetitions. We need more entrepreneurship. So invent your project rather than wait that somebody writes down the competition program and puts it somewhere on the internet. We just can press a button, download it, and start turn on the AutoCAD as the next phase. That's I think, looking also the new generation of designers and planners, they have a bit of a different mindset. I'm very happy about it.
Harris, given that I've just embarked on an entrepreneurial path, you give me lots of hope and optimism too. So thank you for that. And I guess given all the work you're doing, what excites you the most going forward into the future?
This diversity of experiences I'm allowed to have of different encounters, human encounters, different people in different contexts, and somehow start in this business and entrepreneurship is, it sounds so aggressive to many people, but this is basically thinking of how to provide something to somebody of value. I don't know if such a definition is somewhere in Wikipedia, but that's about it. And being able to talk and discuss and with so many people from all over the world is really inspiring, is energizing. And especially not just this conversation, that's the first step, but also think, what can we do together?
Yeah.
And this is for me, entrepreneurship is like sitting with somebody, what can we do together? That's me. This is my time and energy and my competences and my network. This is what I bring on the table. This is what you bring on the table. What can we do together or not? And this sort of this identification of what can we do together and where. That's the next question. Who is the problem or challenge owner? Which means that, it's like, what can we do? How can we do it? And where can we do it?
Yeah.
And when, of course, and where and when. And then, of course, you have to find a mayor or a developer who is willing to accept these ideas and acknowledge it and also remunerate us for our work. And in this sense, this is the most sort of this diversity of human experiences and the identification, what can we do together? That's something that doesn't get boring. And it includes a lot of traveling. It includes a lot of maybe sometimes like less than 8 hours of sleep. It includes a lot of physical and mental effort that I need to put in, but that's something that I do with pleasure.
And just reminding our listeners again, Harris just got off a plane a few hours ago. Well, many more hours now, but always appreciate you being here on the show. And like I do with every guest, I'd love to ask you the key questions I ask everyone so that listeners can get to know even more about you and our very complex and already rich conversation. And I guess the one word that I haven't really heard as much from you as I have mentioned it myself is innovation. So what does innovation in your view truly mean, and how has it shaped the way you approach challenges, opportunities in your work?
Maybe I mentioned that. I haven't mentioned the word enough because I believe innovation is everything, in everywhere, right? It's in a way where you see that we have to do a master plan where you have to do the physical design and the climate adaptation measures like we did in Basel.
Yeah.
And we, for example, we realized that 1970s and 80s and 60s grand ensembles, the large neighborhoods in the eastern part of Berlin, have not been its revitalization not been tackled in a way that public green space, mobility, and buildings have been treated in a holistic way. And even if you propose a alternative approach, it's de facto innovative.
Yeah.
Because it proposes to do things in a different way. And I feel that any form of entrepreneurship is per se innovative. So it's also a pity that we reduce this term to certain small phases of research and development, but innovation is anything that deals with doing things differently. And I think I have been doing things or trying to do things different, not just to do them differently, but to do them. If I see that something is not effective and efficient, I propose to do it differently.
Yeah.
And then maybe this is then the innovative part. And in this sense, doing things differently and doing them effectively, if you do that, you will inevitably do, even though if you're not thinking about it as such, you will do it in an innovative way.
I guess nowadays they've started to replace that word with disruption, starting to get itself the innovation connotation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it makes sense, thinking differently, doing things out of the ordinary. Was there a key moment, book, paper, or person that completely changed the course of your career or your mindset?
It was almost easier to say, I was sitting there the other day and I was 16. I read this book and then it changed everything. I think it's a plethora. It's not just a million, but thousands of small bits and pieces that influence you. Is it a inspiring professor? Is it this energetic and wise taxi driver that tells you much more about a city than anyone else could because he's spending the whole day in the city?
Yeah, that's so true.
Reading this, one page in this particular book, I feel that we should be very careful there are all these kind of famous books from, in let's say the global north, in terms of architecture and urban design history. And we all know about, Ian McHarg and Christopher Alexander and Le Corbusier's books. And, now later much more literature was published and Kohlhaas books. I would say we should be that when you read interviews, many people mention the same books. I think it's way more complicated. I read all of these books that I mentioned, but filtering out what influences you, then filtering out things that you experience in everyday life, in everyday encounters, what you learn in sports, right? I play football and soccer, and what you can learn from, about teamwork and discipline. It's something you can definitely, use in your projects. You have to cover. I played, central midfielder for many years in football.
Yeah,
and
nice.
then you have to, you're the guy who is responsible for the defense in a way. You have to interrupt actions of the attacking team. But then if you get a ball, you have to distribute it. Is it the left or the right, player who is on the flanks, on the wings? And then you have to decide, do you start to shoot? Because I played offensive central midfielder. Do you shoot or do you put the striker in spotlight, etc., etc.? So it's, and then, if somebody doesn't really, does his or her own part, you have to cover it, etc. It's just not like a cheap sport metaphor, it's really, so many things can influence you, and you travel. And me spending the childhood in all these different places, you see one place being bombed to the ground and the other one comes out of the ashes, and meeting all these different, elements of music, of this Spanish Sephardic Jewish community that brought music that brought their style that's where also fado, the Portuguese music, of course, because the regional influence has been kind of influenced by. So you see this incredible kind of knowledge transfers across Europe, language, how it travels, and particular words. So I feel we have to be like a sponge, right, to just absorb all of these different stimuli and probably be a bit more aware of it, what influences you. Many things influence you in an invisible way that you're not even aware. But this is then who we become, the person who become, the professional who become. And maybe if there's some younger colleagues listening, it's just, practice with the skills and your personality. So nowadays, everybody can, nowadays AI is going to be drawing buildings, right? So that's not enough. It's not enough to turn on AutoCAD and start, like connecting lines into a polygon. It's not enough. Be yourself. And I would say this, if division between this is who I am as a person, who I am as a designer or planner. I've seen a lot of people struggling with that, and I feel that's something we should be very much aware of. It's who you are, and this is the person who practices, and this has to be hopefully not done in a schizophrenic way, but it has to be done in a symbiotic way.
Well said. And you are the melting pot of the experiences you have, and I guess shows the huge importance of leading a balanced life where you have time for yourself to explore the world and to see the world, because they can only help you in a positive way in your professional side as well. And so with all these different things that, you engage in, the travels you do, I just have to ask, and obviously it's one of the questions, but time management. I mean, how do you balance your professional and personal time? And do you have any tips for listeners?
I disagree with Steve Jobs on many things, but what I agree with, I listened to an interview with him, is that this kind of work-life balance, that's also what Jeff Bezos said once, and not just now to quote all of these billionaires. It's not the point here. And this is what I just said before. If we divide these different layers of our persona, this is when it gets difficult. If it's a work-life kind of symbiosis, there is a threat that you will work or like spend more energy than you want, but then it becomes a lifestyle. It becomes a lifestyle. So inevitably the people who you work with and on with projects, they inevitably, if you do great things together, if you collect your experience, they become your friends. It's not just that it's the friends, somebody you categorize as friend who goes and visits a basketball game with you. It's different kind of friendship can emerge in a different context. And in this sense, I do not believe in this. And I believe it's actually dangerous to divide from who you are and what do you do. If you divide that, obviously we live in an era of burnouts and of a depletion of energy, etc. And hyper stimulation through digital media and devices. But you need to find this, not a balance, but a synergy. And this is when, at least for me, I understand it like that, or it came to happen like that. And this is why I do not feel like I'm working very often. And I don't know where work begins and leisure ends and other way around. It sounds maybe quite dangerous to say such a thing, but you have to be obviously professional and have to deliver, but you can also experience things as yourself and not wait that you come home at 6 p.m. and then be yourself. And before that, you be in something, whatever you are, a soldier of a office or institute or whatever. The personality we have to be, and this is something we can learn in Europe a lot from. I think even from Eastern Europe, or even from, I hate to divide the world in this terrible kind of whatever geographic global south and north, etc. But there's a lot we can learn of being ourselves and combining it with what we do.
Bring your identity into it.
Yes.
Be whole, because
that's the value that you bring in. It's you in your set of experiences. You can sum it up in the word identity, but who you are.
Yeah. But especially pursue that depth, pursue that diversity, because it shapes you even better.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And makes it unique.
That's true.
Makes it unique. And if 2,000 people use the same software, there has to be a certain way to stand out, not just to be standing out.
Yeah.
We realize in our profession to higher and bigger, this is how you stand out. You design, there's a 500 meter tall tower, then you design a 600 meter tall tower, right? And this is how you stand out. No, I mean, it's not about this intensity. It's about standing out through your style. There's something called Haltung in German. This is the attitude. Translate as attitude, but you can translate. Also, the word Baukultur is difficult to translate. But that's what I would really, if any kind of younger, if students, young professional listening, this is, if I may provide an advice, that's the one I would provide.
No, it's fantastic. And so, what is your favorite childhood memory?
I had spent some beautiful moments of my childhood, but also moments that, technically speaking, 99% of people who listen to this would probably say, wow, that's a traumatic experience. Spending your childhood in refugee camps, right? Or spending your childhood partly in wartime conditions where your life is in danger, where you don't have enough food and water. But being in these situations and looking at human solidarity, how much humans can help each other and share resources and food without not wanting to be too romantic or pathetic, but it's indeed beautiful. So I have great memories that are probably sound incredibly traumatic to many, but this is something I really remember, that even in these worst moments, we can find ways to collaborate, be innovative, entrepreneurial, find ways, and not, get depressed and that get frozen and not do things. So in this sense, this beauty of energy, even survival energy, but also energy to change things, is something that I take as a lesson learned. I take it as a level of energy, or better said, a source of energy. Even nowadays, thinking back of my childhood in this particular experiences.
I guess you reflect back fondly on the moments that worked well. The moments that gave hope, the moments that, forge identity, forge, lessons in survival and resilience as well. I guess saying, if I didn't have that experience back then, I wouldn't be as tough or as, witty or as quick acting as I am now.
I would say, I hope that's the case. But I would say, take it as a life experience. I mean, it obviously is a traumatic experience, but take it as a life experience, and it's part of you then. Yeah. And it makes you, again, this overused terms of, what doesn't kill you make you stronger and all of these things, but it's taking a life experience. And that's why I see there's a lot of angst. There's also a German term that is difficult to be translated. It's not fear. So there's a lot of frustration, fear. You listen to the young generations. They don't want to study because AI is going to replace them anyways. They don't want to have kids because, the climate crisis. How can you bring kids in in a terrible planet? So that's what quite worries me, to be very honest. And that's something that we have to act even in these, most difficult conditions, and whatever happens to it happens for a reason. And then you have to really learn from it and move on of moving and transforming. And that's why I'm quite, as you asked me about, I'm very optimistic in this sense that we are in a moment that doesn't look good for many. We look into there's different, parameters and KPIs to look at geopolitical macroeconomic instability that's probably high right now, but
love the voice change there.
it's a part of the Homo sapiens apparently, and all whatever is happening now, it already happened in the past, so we can really learn from history.
Such a strong, powerful message. So Harris, you've offered so much beautiful advice. You've really painted a beautiful journey, also embracing that complexity and lots of reflection as well, other than the football references, which is great. Always nice to know that there's something that also obsesses you. But as we near the end of this episode, really that existential question, given all the activity that you're doing and the beautiful changes you're trying to bring about, what would you most like to be remembered for?
I read a book recently, and then they said that what you once should do is, almost write your own, that there's this different, like, what do you want to be remembered when it says, in memoriam, right? And in this sense, if I contributed to improving the situation, improving the social space situation, if I improve to some sort of environmental degradation, if I improve to the situation of their housing became better and more, if I helped, this is more on a very technical project side, if I strategically contributed to the understanding between different world regions and what they can really learn from each other, instead of just, bombing each other or ignoring each other or extracting each other, I would be very glad that this is my little symbolic, modest contribution to this planet, to this universum. And in this sense, I'm going to be continuous. Just I hope for good health, and I'm working on it, right? We talk about football and nature and fitness. That's something that I'm devoting large chunks of my time. But to be remembered as a bridge builder between nations, between competences, between professions, between cities, and then not just that's a strategic engagement, but then taking what has been connected and then taking this momentum up and bringing it into the physical space. This is what we've been taught of, like to create better green spaces, to create better buildings, to create better neighborhoods. Better means whatever is better for the people who live and work there, right? It's not about me to tell them, I believe this should happen and this is better. This is whatever they believe they're gonna be paying for, and they're gonna be investing there, not just the funding, but also the time. I think there's a lot we can do, and this is why I sometimes don't understand why people can be competitors. There's so many issues and challenges in our cities. To all the architects, planners, designers out there who listen to this, there's enough work for all of you. There's enough work for all of us. So there is in best the word co-opetition fell a few times already, but that's the maximum of friction, a maximum of contested type of situation I accept. So we can definitely, even though maybe we have the same title in our diploma, but then there's different personalities, approaches. And I don't think I have competitors, but I also don't think I'm a competitor to anybody else. We all have our particular place and particular contribution. And I hope that mine will be this bridge builder and this, let's say, transformer, positive transformer, urban transformer for positive change.
Beautifully said, with lots of visual imagery flowing through my head, is in fact for the whole conversation today. So in a way, it's incredible the picture you've painted and how you can make complexity become alive as we listen to your story. But where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
They can find me on social media. You will find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I mean, if you just Google Harris, Piplas. I'm traveling around, of course, even my name and surname. I have to get used that people pronounce it differently. But I think if you look for me, you will find me. Yeah. If you look for Harris or Harris, you will still find me. And I very much look forward to feel free to reach out if you have an idea to reflect on together. If you have a time and energy to think of a brainstorm of think how we transform places and spaces together. And in this sense, looking forward to also thanking you for this fantastic format and your effort and your invitation. And I think this format like this is exactly on this, what I mentioned with communication. We really need to get our messages out, and we need platforms. So therefore, thank you for creating this platform.
It's been a pleasure from my side as well. Thank you for your time.
And very much looking forward to the further conversation and also collaborations. We have different conversations ongoing. And I would say also looking forward to the conversations with the people who reach out to me, and who knows where and when our paths will cross again.
And I guess we'll let serendipity take its course there. And we'll put those links as well as all the information we've discussed on topics today in the show notes so that listeners can then go deeper on it. But Harris, thank you so much for your time. And like I do with every guest, I usually give my guests the floor to deliver their final message to the listeners. So one last message for them to take away from today.
Why do you give me the most difficult questions for the end? We should have started difficult and get easier. Jokes aside. I would just say what I just, maybe repeat what I just said. So feel free to, and this is not even an advice, because how can you advise someone? I mean, you read a book and you won't apply every single letter of this book. So everybody is free to adapt and filter out whatever they hear. So that's why I'm reluctant to giving advice or whatever, or guidelines. But I see we're a bit shy and reluctant to communicate, to take risks, to maybe waste time in, trying to invent 2 or 3 projects that never take place, never happen. Of course it happened so many times, but go out, interact. Nowadays we can interact digitally, interact physically. And this is where magic happens. The butterfly effect, where you see, if I just didn't talk to this lady or in this Starbucks the other day, I wouldn't have a wife or husband, right? So even these little encounters change your life. And let's not overdose it, but I would say the more the merrier. And the more you initiate, ignite, give back, the more will come back. And in this sense, that's maybe my final word of interact. And this is where the magic happens.
Thank you very much. And that wraps up our complex, global, and incredible episode with Harris Piplas. For more information on urban forums and events, the many movements and buzzwords around urban transformation, or just some fun football trivia, check out the show notes for more information over at tgcpodcast.show. And as always, thank you listeners for tuning into this episode and for your feedback and support. If you are enjoying this show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this podcast with your family, friends, colleagues, and even fellow urban strategists. Follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and other podcast channels to stay up to date with the latest releases, or be part of the conversation on Instagram at tgcpodcast_official or our LinkedIn group. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel, Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or Instagram at petermbach87. Give me some feedback or suggest a future guest so that I can keep improving this show. The podcast's intro and outro song is called Starsky by Alex Kieran. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.